Hello, Darren Flynn here with another episode of the ClubLIFE podcast. Thanks for joining us. Well, today we've got an absolute treat for you. We've got a man who spent more than 8 decades at the centre of political, union and community life in Sydney. He's also had a fair bit to do with one of our bigger clubs. Ken Murray was for a long period of time, 38 years, the president of the Randwick Labor Club up until his retirement in 2023, but he's also been at the centre of Labor politics in this town for many a decade as a chief advisor to Bob Carr and as a man who moved in the same circles as Bob Hawke, Neville Ram, Paul Keating and, of course, Gough Whitlam. Very lucky to have Ken Murray here with us on the ClubLIFE podcast. Ken, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Now, Ken, let's go back all the way to the very beginning. You were born in 1942.
Yes.
Grew up in your early years in Alexandria.
I did.
But something happened in 1948 which totally transformed the lives of the Murray family. Tell us about that.
1948, there had been up to that point a £6,000 lottery for paying off the Sydney Harbour Bridge. 1948, they changed that to £12,000. My dear old dad won that second draw of the £12,000 lottery. At the time, we were living with my mother's mother and Dad was a struggling truck driver. I was going to Alexandria Public School. The significance of that £12,000 win was that Dad was able to buy a block of land at Maroubra, build a home, buy 4 Thames trucks and start a transport business which was very successful. He even had a petrol bowser in the backyard. I went from Alexandria Public School to De La Salle College, Coogee. Changed our life entirely.
£12,000 these days to younger people listening might not sound like a lot, but in those days...
It was significant. As I said, the purchase of a house, land, 4 trucks.
And so your dad obviously able to set up his business as a result.
Transport business was very successful.
And as you say, you moved on to De La Salle for your education.
To De La Salle.
Tell us about that experience, because you're quite a devout Catholic, a practising Catholic. What was it like being educated in the Catholic school system in the 1950s?
The De La Salle brothers had a history. Originally in Australia, they started off at Oak Hill College. They had a number of regional schools. I was at Coogee. Laurie Brereton was a schoolmate from Coogee. The De La Salle brothers weren't a big order. In fact, a couple of years after I left there, the school was taken over by the Maris Brothers Order, who were a big organisation up in Randwick at the time. They took over and made it Marcellin Junior School.
And what was it like growing up in Maroubra in the 1950s?
Apart from Malabar Road, the next area was all sandhills. Part of that sandhill still existed, the old 1930s Maroubra Speedway, between where we were just off Malabar Road and Anzac Parade. It was, in those days, pretty quiet area.
And how did you spend your days growing up as a teenager?
I was playing with the school football team and I played locally with the Kensington United football team. My dad was involved in all that. He was the manager of my team. I had a younger brother, 3 years younger, and he would be managing either the school team for me or my brother. He was involved in all those activities. And we were involved with the beach, of course. We're only walking distance. Yes, life was pretty quiet, but it was very imposing insofar as having the opportunity to have the beach there, having the local football team and playing with the school teams and that.
We're going to talk in a moment about your involvement and your contribution to Labor politics in New South Wales and the union movement. In many respects, the origins of your Labor political beliefs were embedded firmly at home. Tell us about growing up in a working class background and your family's attitude towards politics.
While politics was never widely spoken with Mum and Dad, it was just sacrosanct that they supported the Labor Party. They were working class people. I remember my mum telling me when she first got married, it was more or less a sin for the wives to work. And she used to sneak out the back gate, we're living at my grandmother's place, to work for some group as a dressmaker. But that your husband wasn't keeping you, and as a wife, you spent your time in the house and you had a job too. It wasn't looked on that your husband was doing the right thing. But, you know, how that's evolved now, where it's basically both parents have got to work to maintain a mortgage and other things, it's certainly changed 360 degrees.
And in fact, I think in the public service in the 1960s, a woman, as soon as she was married, was expected to no longer work. So
I can tell you more. When I got married at age 25, my wife was the secretary to a senior person at the ES&A Bank in Martin Place. When she got married, she was frankly asked to leave.
very different times.
Very different times.
Let's talk about your entry into the working world. Your first job, you left school at 16, went to work on the waterfront, which is where your father was working at the time. Tell us about that experience for a 16-year-old to go and work on the docks.
It wasn't actually, it was a bit older than 16. I did, for about 3 or 4 years, work for Civil and Civic. They were a major construction firm in Sydney. But when I was about 20, my dad could see I was doing industrial work as more or less a plumber at Civil and Civic, and Dad saw me one day struggling away. The next minute he said, "Look, I don't want you doing that job. I'll get you a job as a clerical person on the Sydney waterfront." And he did. When I first went on the waterfront, Dad was working at sold his transport business, and I was sent down assisting my father. Dad taught me to drive. We went out on 4 occasions. Not on one of those 4 occasions did we arrive home together. He would always be, "What's this?" and do that. I would use some 4-letter words, jump out the car, slam the door and walk home on the 4 occasions. We had a bit of a repeat affair when I assisted him on the waterfront. I was young, I was a bit bright, but I could see ways that you could do things smarter, easier, and save a bit of time. And I tried to point this out to Dad, and no way would he accept anything that I said. And it got to the stage within about 6 months where I had to be working aside another person. Dad and I just weren't hitting it off. You know, he had his ways.
You can't teach an old dog new tricks, as they say.
But as we get on, I'll tell you how the whole thing turned around later on.
OK, we'll come back to that, because it was at the waterfront that you actually got your first proper exposure to politics.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about those experiences.
When on the waterfront, you were working shift work. Often I'd start at 7 in the morning. The day shift would finish about 3 or 4 o'clock. And then I'd go on to the 5 o'clock and do the afternoon shift. I'd finish at 11 o'clock at night from starting at 7 in the morning. That was common on the Sydney waterfront for the clerical people. And if I was in charge of the job, in charge of the ship, I automatically worked the day and evening shift. Someone come on and worked the midnight shift. But I could see there were people coming down there and with nice suits on and driving nice cars, and I made an inquiry, and they were union officials, and they ran the stop work meetings, day shift only, and I thought to myself, this is a step up from what I'm doing with shift work and all that. And I inquired about, how do you become a union official? Well, I was advised, first thing you must do is join the Labor Party. The union had been run by the Communist Party, the Federated Clerks Union on the Sydney waterfront in the 50s. Phil O'Teal, Joe Reardon, 2 prominent people, fought and secured the union back to the Labor Party in the early 60s. So I then joined the Labor Party. Would have been about 1966 or so. And the secretary of my local branch, Maroubra, was Bob Carr. And the president was John O. Johnson, who was president of the Upper House at the time. They were both finished up, basically, lifelong friends. So I joined the Labor Party. I would say within 6 or 8 years, I then became president of the union as well on the Sydney waterfront. There were some funny episodes there. We used to have our stop work meetings at the Sydney Town Hall, and there'd be 1,200 or so there. There was still a communist element in the union, They used to meet at the Central Markets Hotel prior to, it was say a 8:30 meeting at the town hall. And I would park my car down there, have my bag. And as I walked past the Central Markets Hotel, I'd push the door open, they'd be gathered in a corner, and I'd say to them, and what news from the Kremlin today? And with a succession of four-letter words aimed at my direction, I would head up to the meeting. Things were like that on the waterfront. It was a pretty tough entity.
Absolutely, and it was a historic time in the fortunes of the Australian Labour movement with the schism within the party.
Yeah.
Was there any violence between the communists and the Labour delegates?
I didn't see any, only verbal violence. But when you chaired a meeting of 1,200 people, you always had to be aware. The Coms would always throw something up, a little bit dicey with meeting procedure and that, and you had to be on your toes to be able to give them a reasonable answer. They're always trying to catch you out and show your inability all the time. But watching the likes of John O. Johnson chair branch meetings and that, who was president of the upper house, you knew what the rules were. And Bob Carr, on one occasion at a meeting, someone threw up a very tricky move, and Bob said, no, that's unacceptable because it's a double negative. I'd never heard of that. But you wouldn't want to know at a stop work meeting that I had at the town hall, a chap who stood for federal parliament later on threw up to me a proposition which was outrageous. But I remember the old card trick, and I said to him, Norm, I can't accept that. It's a double negative. If he'd have asked me what a double negative was, I'd have been lost. You know, you learn things by mixing with people like that.
And you mentioned Bob Carr, John O. Johnson. I mean, it was the golden age of New South Wales Labor politics, and most of those people went on to hold very senior positions federally and at state level in the 80s.
Foreign Affairs Minister federally.
Well, let's talk about Bob Carr, because you've obviously had a very long relationship with Bob. You were one of his trusted advisors for a long period of time. I've heard about how you first came into contact with him. What was it about Bob that you think made him such an effective politician?
Bob was an excellent speaker. Bob had a great knowledge of Labor Party history, and he would always put himself forward for speaking engagements and that, and he was an excellent speaker. I can remember when he was Premier, being at an Australia Day function at Darling Harbour. I was on the board of Sydney Ports at the time and chairman of the Sydney Harbour Pilots. I was 2 tables away from where the governor was sitting, that was Mari Bashir, and Bob spoke on the fall of Singapore. I'd never heard Bob speak on that sort of area of discussion. It was a marvellous speech, and from where I could see, Mari Bashir was wiping her eyes. And I said to Bob later on, I said, did you realise you brought tears to the eyes of the governor, Mari Bashir? He said, I didn't know that. I said, well, I'm telling you did, because I was right in line with where she was sitting. But he was an excellent speaker.
Very eloquent man.
Very eloquent.
And more than any other political leader, probably recast the way that politicians engage with the media. As someone who worked in radio for a long time, Bob would always call the newsroom first thing in the morning to give his grabs for that day and set the news agenda. Really astute politician. I think and you would obviously know much better than me, but Bob always struck me as someone who wanted to lead, but he was perhaps an unlikely leader in the mid-1980s. He certainly, I don't think anyone outside the party fancied him as a premier, but you thought he had that leadership quality.
Bob intended to go into the state parliament, stay for a period, and then when Lyle retired, he would take the federal seat. That all changed when Barry got beat by that big margin, and there was no one left but Bob to take on the leadership of the ALP. He eventually, as you said earlier on, got a spot in federal parliament as a foreign affairs minister and did an excellent job with that as well. No, Bob's a very decent person, and I must say in all my association with him, he's never been anything but very, very good to me, and not that I've asked for anything really, but he's always been very good to me.
We're going to come back to Bob Carr a little bit later on. We're also going to talk to you about some of the other Labor luminaries that you dealt with in a very long political career and get some thoughts and maybe the odd anecdote on people like Gough Whitlam and Bob Hawke. I want to talk about your involvement in the registered club industry, though, if I may, because it wasn't as if you envisaged a career in the club industry or a role in the club industry, but you ended up serving on the board and as president of the Randwick Labor Club for decades. Yeah. Tell us how that came about.
In 1981, I was playing a bit of lower grade cricket for Randwick. I'm batting in the nets down at Coogee Oval, and a voice from on the roadway just behind the nets called out to me. And I look around, and it was an old football colleague, Jim Glanville, who was assistant manager at the Labor Club. I didn't know that at the time, so I've stopped batting and, "What do you want, Jim?" He says, "There's a board meeting at the Labor Club, and they want you there. They've asked me to come down and find out. I've rang your wife. She said you're down here at cricket practice." I'm in a pair of dirty old shorts and a T-shirt. I take the pads off, put the bat away, and go with Jim up to the Labor Club. Go upstairs to the fourth floor, open the door, and there's a board meeting in progress. When I walked in, I said, "What's happening?" I knew I knew all the board members. They said, "Well, you know, Freddie Waller died. He was the president." I said, "Yes, I went to his funeral with everyone." And they said, "Well, we have to get a replacement for him. And we've decided here that you're going to be it." So that's how I joined the Labor Club that night.
And you weren't even a member of the club at the time,
Probably. I can't remember if I was. Probably not. But I was a shock of my life. I went out to cricket practice and come home a member of the Labor Club board.
I remember reading in Bill Clinton's autobiography a bit of life advice from Bill: never accept a position or a role that you don't want. Clearly, there was something about serving on that board that appealed to you?
Yes, there was. But I knew them all as friends, that I'd mixed with them in the Labor politics and all. You had to be 3 years a member of the Labor Party to be on the board anyway.
And what were some of the big challenges facing the club at the time? And this is the early 1980s, so I'm assuming the random breath testing's either just come in or about to come in?
The club had really started in 1963. It was an old rundown timber building, and they were talking about putting the Eastern Suburbs Railway through to Randwick, and that was in the way. So I think it was Bob Askin. They were renting the club. I don't think they owned it. And Bob Askin got to a stage where they had to get out, and they destroyed the club. The railway never went there, but they put up a high-rise building. But they were able to buy 2 properties directly opposite in Allison Road. And with those 2 properties, they built a 4-storey club. That started in September 1972. Well, I came on the board in 81. No, I was on the board from 81 to 2023. I was president from 85 to 2023. When I started off as president, we had an asset value of $6 million. When I retired in 2023, it was $55 million. When I'd been there about 3 or 4 years, an opportunity arose where a block of 6 units next door came up for sale, and I talked the board into buying that block. It was only $500,000 in those days, and I had to struggle a bit, and it was a real battle because a lot of my board members then were pretty elderly, and they'd come through the Depression. I know with my dear old dad, it was the same. You've come through the Depression, it does have an effect on you. I used to take Dad shopping, and everything that was cheap and nasty, he'd be putting in the trolley, and I'd be just as quick taking it out and putting in something a bit upmarket. People who went through the Depression, some of them in later life, they never really got over it, and it was a real struggle. But I eventually got the board to agree to buy this 1 block of units next door. Within 12 months, it had doubled in price. From then on, any block or anything that came up for sale, both the hands went up. We then bought 2 houses on the other side of the club, old historic houses, and we continued to buy other blocks of units next to the one we had. But our greatest success Next to these two historic houses was a funeral parlour, and we bought the funeral parlour. It was only 2 floors. We demolished the funeral parlour, and we were able to turn it into 20 units and 3 or 4 shops. Those 2 historic places we had next door to the club, we went to court. We couldn't do anything with them. They wouldn't let us do anything. But the success of the funeral parlour block of units, they both had big backyards. So we were able to convert that funeral parlour into an L shape using the 2 backyards of the historic buildings, which are still there today. You can't touch. Today, with the shops and the units, they must get a return of about 1.8, I'd say, or something like that.
It's interesting, Ken, because we talk a lot these days about diversification within the club industry as if it's almost like a new thing, but you were doing this back in the 1980s.
Oh, yes, late 80s and 90s, yes.
You've obviously stood down from the board in 2023 after 4 decades at the club.
I indicated to the board some time before that I'd been the president for, I think, 38 years, and I was going to go at 80. I thought, that's reasonable. So they had probably 6 months' notice or so, and true to my word, at age 80, I did retire. Unfortunately, the club has fallen on a bit of hard times, but we also, in that time, we took over 2 other particular clubs. One was the Randwick Bowling Club in 2010. They came to see us and they were in financial difficulty. They're on a very, very high point in Randwick, 2 bowling greens. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but as a development site, it's really in the A-grade area, overlooking Randwick Racecourse and that. It's sometime, if they ever get into strife, they could make do very well out of that site. It may never happen. Let's hope it doesn't. And in 2017, we took over the Coogee Bowling Club, which we don't own. I think it's owned by the Water Board and was run on their behalf by Randwick Council. Those are the other 2 clubs that we're involved with.
And they've become very popular with families and with younger people down at the Coogee Bowling Club, Coogee Beach Club.
Particularly in the summer months. Yeah. You'd be surprised at the number of other people that we've got down there, particularly Irish. I've been in Prince Wales Hospital a few times. The percentage there of Irish nurses is huge. So much so, the locals are now calling it County Coogee.
Is that right?
Yes. And the number of others there, one time we were sponsoring a Irish soccer team from that area. But in the summer months, they can walk up from the beach. It really does well.
2 great pickups. You mentioned the primary venue falling on hard times recently. Yes. How upsetting was it for you to see the doors close?
When I looked just financially how they were going, they made a decision to sell the club on the 14th of December last. I can see the predicament they were in, and if I was there, I would have had to make the same decision. And they didn't sell everything. The 2 historic buildings are still there. The 20 units and shops from the funeral parlour are still there. So there's still an income coming in, but they're now operating through the 2 bowling clubs.
And the club will live on in those 2 venues moving forward?
Yes, the club will live on in those 2 venues. Well, it was in the annual report. There's nothing to be hidden. The site was sold for $38 million, incorporating the unit flats on the lower side. But they've still got an income coming in, as I said, from the other areas. So I think they're doing all right.
A more than 4-decade involvement with that club.
Yes,
Well, tell us about some of your happier memories at being involved in Randwick Labor Club.
One of the things with being the Labor Club, it was the dominant force for Labor in the eastern suburbs. All the Labor Party branches, they would meet at the Labor Club. The federal, local government and state government electoral groups all met at the Labor Club. That was the central place. It was a central place for election campaigns. You had Gough Whitlam there and Bob Hawke, Paul Keating, and the same with the state elections coming round. The place would be packed. You know, we could hold on the auditorium floor about 700 people, and it would be packed.
Well, you had one particular campaign launch with both Bob Hawke and Gough Whitlam in the room. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yes. Bob arrived early with Blanche, so I sat with them in the boardroom, and I said to Bob was drinking, having a slight drink in those times. I said, well, what would you like, Bob? He said, the best red in the house, Ken. And I said to Blanche, what would you like to drink, Blanche? And she said, a nice warm glass of water. There's a difference. But I remember with Gough, we were walking down to the hall. Bob had gone and sat on the stage. And as we were walking down, there was two stories here. As we're walking down to the hall, we come to the third floor and the place is packed, but the huge statue of Gough walking in on beside him, people saw him and all of a sudden there's uproar. People are jumping up, clapping and whatnot, carrying on. And I said to him, God, Gough, as soon as you've walked in, did you notice how the place changed? And he said to me, you noticed it too, comrade?
Typically modest Gough there.
Yeah, modest Gough. Bob was very good. Bob Hawke, he had a certain charm about him and he was loved by the working people sort of thing. I can remember another funny issue with Gough. It might have been that night, we were given each a period of time to speak. I, introducing Gough and Bob, had 6 minutes. Gough had 14 and Bob had 34. So I do my 6. Gough starts off and he gets to about 14. Then it gets to 20. And I'm looking from the stage to the front row and I can see Margaret, his wife, there. And she's going like this to Gough.
Giving him the wind-up.
Giving him the wind-up, you know. Doesn't stop him. From 14 minutes, he's at 20 and then 30. All of a sudden, Margaret bellows out, and you could clearly hear it there, your old blubbermouth or something like that.
Oh, you bloody old gas bag, I think it
yeah, something like that. You bloody old gas bag. And that brought him down and he turned it up about 4 minutes later. Yeah, you bloody old gas bag or something like that.
Never short of a word, Gough.
Never short of a word, but he went on. It's character.
When you reflect on the likes of Gough Whitlam, Bob Hawke, Paul Keating, how do you, and it's hard, it's a difficult question to answer, how do you look at them in terms of their Labor legacy? Who's the doyen of Labor figures over the last century?
People will always say Gough because of the way that he went out. You know, it was a situation that developed right across Australia that we had been wronged. As it turned out, of course, the election went badly. But the issue of the Governor-General sacking a Prime Minister, never been done before as far as I know, never been done before.
I think the Governor in New South Wales dismissed Jack Lang in the 30s,
yes,
but you're right,
yes.
At federal level, never before.
At federal level, never happened before. There'd only ever been one Prime Minister lost his seat. It was when an English gentleman in 1927.
Oh, Stanley Melbourne Bruce. I think.
Yes,
yeah.
went out in 27. But this was headline stuff all over the world. We thought that Labor had been out for so long that we were wronged, and we'll still say we were wrong. Look, if you ask people in my age group, I'd still say they'd say Gough Whitlam. That's what they'd remember because of the incident and how it was portrayed.
Is Bob Hawke the best retail politician you've ever seen? Best campaigner?
I would think, yes, he's an excellent campaigner. Neville Wran was brilliant on a state basis. Neville Wran was brilliant too. But Hawke was as close to an average Australian as you could get. You could see him at the races with the paper open. You could see him at a football match. He was as close as the average Australian as you'd see.
I want to ask you about a Labor politician from more recent times. Peter Garrett, of course, former frontman of Midnight Oil, and he was one of your local members. You probably supported Peter's campaigns for federal parliament in the seat of Kingston Smith.
That's going to be interesting.
Tell us about Peter, because Peter obviously had a bit of a falling out with the club industry more broadly over some comments that he made.
And do you think,
in his
how do you think I reacted?
Not particularly well, I wouldn't have thought. Ken, tell us about that.
Well. Peter got stuck into the club industry, and I went down, I had a meeting with Peter, and I got stuck into Peter about his attitude towards the club industry. But then at the Junior League Club, they had a meeting about that issue. Peter Garrett spoke at that meeting, and he was on the stage, and myself, and the president of the Junior League, whatnot, and Peter, for all his strength and that, he went ahead and he spoke against the issue in the club industry. I admitted to the group, the crowd that was there, that I can't remember ever speaking against someone who was a Labor Member of Parliament. But I had no option. I got stuck into Peter. The friendship fell apart. But funny, about 8 months ago, a secretary who'd worked for Peter for many years passed away. And she was buried over in the north side, and I was at the funeral, as Peter was. Peter did the homily, actually, and I thought to myself, after we're standing around outside after, oh, you know, there's no use keeping this situation between myself and Peter. So I went up and I shook hands with Peter and said, Peter, I know we had a falling out some years ago, but it's no use continuing on that way. As far as I'm concerned, I'm willing to forget everything, and Peter was too. So we were all right back together again.
It was a challenging time for Labor times in the club industry. I mean, we'd never been, in the history of the club industry, clubs were working man's paradise, really. So the affinity between clubs and the Labor Party was strong. So during mandatory pre-commitment, there were obviously some fairly tense conversations and battles between Labor Party figures and the industry.
Yes.
Do you think that in more recent times those wounds have been healed? We're having a very good relationship with the New South Wales government now.
You don't hear anything of that previous problem we had. It's died, and died very quickly. We've got a very good Premier at the moment who's done a first-class job.
Now, I want to talk to you about poker machines more broadly, because there has been a lot of noise in recent years in the aftermath of Dominic Perrottet becoming Premier about gambling harm. It's something the industry is acutely aware of. What was your view as someone who ran a club for a long time as the president, running the board at Randwick Labor Council? What do you say to people who criticise the industry for not doing enough to protect problem gamblers?
Well, let's face it, poker machines bring the major revenue into the club. But what does the club do with it? They do all sorts of organisations they're supporting, all sorts of charitable organisations. The money isn't just wasted. There's so many, particularly elderly people, that get great benefits out of being at the club. Not necessarily, they might put a few dollars in a poker machine, but there's a widespread other organisations there. They can be playing cards, they can be playing drafts. There's a myriad of things that they can be involved in that takes them out of, if their husbands have passed away or wives have passed away, sitting at home by themselves, watching television or something. And they've got friendships at those places. It changes their life. It gives them a great opportunity to be out socially. Poker machines do a lot of bring a lot of benefits. In my case, in my 42 years on the board, I never played a poker machine.
Never once?
Never once. Because if I did and got a jackpot, they'd say it was crook. Yeah, of course, they would. Yeah. Poker machines do a lot of good too.
When you reflect back on a lifetime in and around the industry, what do you see as some of the key changes in the industry since your early days, and what do you see as the major challenges for clubs in the decades ahead?
Some of the key changes I see now, the entertainment has probably dropped off a bit, but the interest in the happy hour situation, that is so widespread now, and it is beneficial. You'll go into clubs, and some of my friends tell me what they do at the local RSL out at Malabar. They have a happy hour, I think, most afternoons from 4 o'clock, Monday to Friday. On Saturday and Sunday, it starts about 1 o'clock. And people arrive there, 10 minutes or so before the happy hour, and as soon as the happy hour comes, the bar's rushed. So that's been a good quality thing, I think.
And that's probably one of the things that's remained consistent about the industry is, particularly in a cost of living crisis such as we're having at the moment, you get good value at your local club.
Yes, you're getting good value. And the same with the restaurants and all. They're very good value insofar as the food offerings and things like that.
We're going to run out of time soon. We could keep talking all afternoon. I'm going to ask you a couple of quick questions. One, finally, on politics. We've talked a lot about the golden age of Australian politics, which for a lot of us was in the 1980s, 1990s.
Yes.
Do you at all despair these days when you look at the quality of political discourse, particularly federally, less so at the New South Wales level, but do you sometimes despair at the level of political discourse in this country these days?
Well, if you look at our Prime Minister, it just shows you can come from the poorest family, his mother, single mother, with a working class family. I think they lived in a housing commission property. And he's risen through the ranks to the senior place in the country. It just shows you've still got an opportunity here. You haven't got to be a Rhodes Scholar, admittedly Bob Hawke was. Even if you're at the bottom working class, you can still find your way through. That's one of the things that I really appreciate. We've had some very good politicians. Paul Keating was another one who was working behind a shop counter when he was younger. As an excellent Prime Minister. Well, Hawke had education level was superb, being a Rhodes Scholar and whatnot.
Ken, I've got time for 3 more questions. I'm going to ask you one, reflecting back on your time in the club industry, some of the most impressive characters that you've interacted with over those years. I know we were talking before we started rolling about Peter Newell.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the figures that you've dealt with over the years.
Well, Peter Newell was really a first-class gentleman. I was always impressed with Peter with I think it's 13 areas in New South Wales. Peter flew out to all of them. He wasn't sitting in the office here. I went to some of those meetings at different times in country areas. Peter was at everything. He was first class for the club industry. And I thought, your current president,
Sally
Ann is excellent. I, met Sally Ann when she was president of the bowling club over there at Brighton.
Oh, the Ramsgate RSL?
Ramsgate RSL, yes. I think at that time she would have been amazed if you'd have said to her, one day you're going to be chair of Clubs New South Wales. I think she would have been amazed. But she swept that aside and has done that.
Yep.
And I think you're very fortunate to have a person of her stature as the president of Clubs New South Wales. How you talked her into taking the job is, I don't know. I don't know who talked her into taking the job.
Well, whoever it was, we owe them a big vote of thanks.
We owe them a vote of thanks, I can tell you, because she's an excellent person, and let's hope she stays for quite a few years.
2 more quick questions before we go. Finally, the question we ask of everyone on the podcast, we're putting together a bit of a book on this. Your favourite film of all time?
Gladiator.
With the Russell Crowe
Yes,
film?
the Russell Crowe film, Gladiator. It was a significant, the leading person was down to slavery and that, and he fought his way out of that to get a group together and try and change the world sort of thing. I thought it was a very impressive film.
Wonderful film. Russell Crowe, an excellent actor. We claim him as our own. He might be a Kiwi, but we claim him as an Australian anyway.
We claim him for South Sydney.
Exactly. Well, you're a South Sydney man as well.
South Sydney.
Yeah, exactly. He's done a good job there since he took over.
He's done a good job there.
Finally, Ken, and you're well placed to answer this question, why do you think registered clubs will still be around in 100 years' time?
The registered clubs play a large role. Forget poker machines and that. They play a large role, particularly for senior citizens, in giving them an opportunity. Many of them, husbands or wives, pass away, and they can go to the club. They can meet people socially. They meet a new group of friends. They can be involved in so many different things, from bowling clubs to card games to bingo. There's so many things there that can take them out of a lonely house, lonely lifestyle. and mixed with friends and people their own age group. I think clubs will be around for a long, long time because they're a caring group that looks after elderly people. You know, there's no reason to think that clubs won't be successful in years to come.
Ken, fine sentiment on which to end. It's been a fascinating life. Thank you very much for talking about it. We could have talked all day, but thanks very much for joining us on the Club Life podcast.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Well, there he is, Ken Murray. Of course, 42 years on the board of Randwick Labour Club, and plenty of fascinating stories there as well. Great to have a chat with Ken. Now, that's all we've got time for on today's episode of the Club Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel so you're alerted whenever a new episode drops. Search Club Life Podcast wherever you consume your podcast and hit subscribe. If you have a suggestion on who might make an interesting future guest, get in touch with the team by emailing clublife@clubsnsw.com.au. Thanks for listening and bye for now.